the ancient world had for great river civilizations. Mesopotamia grew by the Tigris and Euphrates. China began on the Yellow River. The Indus Valley culture lived by its river. But only one lasted 3,000 years, straight Egypt on the Nile. Why was ancient Egypt so tough? How did it outlive other old worlds? Today we map all of ancient Egypt's story. From the first farmers by the Nile's rich banks to Cleopatra's pact with Rome. This is not just about pyramids and mummies. It is about how a culture kept its core for 30 centuries, through floods, famine, invasion, and for unrule. Long before pyramids or godlike pharaohs, prehistoric Egypt began. The story starts around 10,000 BC. North Africa was wetter and greener then. Early people lived as roaming hunters. They followed animals and gathered wild plants. These early Egyptians left hints of their life. Stone tools by old lakes and rock, art of extinct beasts. Around 7,000 BC the climate dried. Groups gathered by the Nile where water stayed. This was a huge human shift from hunting to farming. Early farmers grew barley and wheat. They raised cows and goats and built villages by the river. The Nile shaped early Egyptian life. Its floods came each year like clockwork. Every summer, the river rose, leaving rich silt. This made soil very fertile for big harvests. The predictable cycle gave Egyptians a sense of order. This idea later showed in their religion. Early groups had complex burials showing beliefs about death. At En-Abtapli, a people built a stone circle around 5000 BC. It tracked the sun and stars, showing early astronomy. This knowledge became key to later Egyptian thought. As villages grew, material culture thrived. Special pottery appeared like black tadware from Upper Egypt. Craft workers used bone, ivory, stones, and later copper. Early Egyptian figures show art growing over time. Animals, fertility symbols, and human shapes got more detailed. As communities grew, social ranks appeared. By 4,500 BC, some graves had finer goods than others. This shows elite groups with more resources. These differences led to chiefdoms later. Prehistoric Egypt was not isolated. Trade networks reached the Levant, Nubia, and the Red Sea. Copper from Sinai, gold from Nubia, shells from the Mediterranean. These goods came to Egypt, showing early trade routes. By 4000 BC, different cultures lived along the Nile. In the north, the Modi culture had Levant links. In the south, the Bad, Aryan, and later Nakhada cultures grew complex. The Nakhada culture, near modern Luxor, spread north. It set the stage for Egypt's unification. In the last prehistoric centuries, power centers rose. Sites like Hyrake and Polis had walled towns, big buildings, and workshops. At Abydos, fancy tombs suggest strong rulers. These small states each held parts of the Nile. They were the last step before a united Egypt. From these divided states came a huge political event. Around 3100 BC, King Narmer did the impossible. The ruler from Upper Egypt conquered Lower Egypt. He made the world's first united nation-state. The story survives on the Narmer Palace stone slab. One side shows Narmer with Upper Egypt's white crown. The other shows him with Lower Egypt's red crown. The palette does more than show a win. It creates a visual language of kingship for all Egyptian history. It is the first example of political art in story. Narmer's genius was not just conquest, but making rules seem right. He became the true ruler of both lands. This created a dual king idea, the base for Egyptian rule. The king became both earthly leader and divine link. Memphis was built at the Nile's midpoint. This place showed the joining of Egypt, two parts. Narmer likely started Memphis later. Kings made it big. It was Egypt's capital for 8 centuries. The look of unity went to royal items too. The double crown combined the white and red crowns. Worn together, they showed the new united state. Royal titles also got dual parts. The sedge plant for Upper Egypt and the bee for Lower Egypt. Interestingly, the word pharaoh was not used yet. It came over 1,000 years later. Back then, the king was called names like ruler of 2 lands. The word pharaoh first meant great house or palace. Beyond symbols, unity needed practical change. Running a big state helped writing develop. Early hieroglyphs date to this time. Standard measures, tax systems, and organized religion grew. Pottery and art styles became more similar across regions. This created one cultural identity. This change from many powers to one state is a history success story. Narmer's unification made a structure so strong it lasted 3 millennia. Narmer's heirs faced a big task building a government. This time is called the early dynastic period, about 3100 to 26 Itexes BC. These first kings turned military win into a lasting civilization. Memphis became the nation's administrative heart. Writing got better under these early kings. Royal names were put in cirque, HS, early name boxes. These early hieroglyphs were for rule, not literature. Royal burial customs show early society best. At Abydos, big tombs had rows of smaller graves. These smaller graves held officials and servants. They were killed to go with the king into the afterlife. King Djeozdom had nearly 600 sacrificed people. This practice stopped later, but shows early divine kingship ideas. To manage land, early kings split Egypt into nomes. Each nome had a governor, called a nomarch. This nome system was Egypt's first real bureaucracy. It allowed tax and resource control across the land. This system lasted thousands of years, a sign it worked well. This time saw the start of religious thought. The king was seen as divine in life and joined gods after death. Building styles also changed. Mud brick mastaba tombs grew more complex. Some royal tombs began using stone. This hinted at the all-stone monuments to come. These early stone works were a big technical leap. This period had conflict too. Inscriptions hint at fights about gods Horus and Seth in Dynasty 2. The last dynasty to King Khosek, he MWY reunited Egypt. His name means the two powers appear. He used both Horus and Seth, symbols in his titles. Artistically, early artists set styles for thousands of years. A side view of people size to show importance in the grid system. Early works like the Ivory King Den figures show skill early on. Egypt's story changes with Dynasty 3. Around 26 Itexes BC, King Djoser took the throne. Egypt was about to change greatly. A modest early kingdom would soon do amazing building. King Djoser's vision changed history. His vizier Imhotep built his eternal tomb. Breaking from mud brick mass to BAS, Imhotep designed the step pyramid at Sukkot. This was a huge leap in size and material. It rose 204 feet high with 6 levels. It used about 850,000 tons of stone. It was humanity's first big stone building. The mental impact was huge. Before Djoser, royal tombs were made from materials that fade. The step pyramid said the king's power went beyond time. Its white limestone shone in the sun, a sign of royal godhood. The complex around the pyramid shows smart design. A big wall surrounded a ceremonial courtyard. It had ritual structures like the Sed festival court. Here the king did renewal rites to prove his rule. These buildings were first made in wood and reed. Imhotep copied them in stone, a big innovation. Imhotep was more than an architect. He was chief minister and high priest of Ptah. He knew medicine, astronomy, math, and religion. His fame was so great, he became a god later. People worshipped him as a god of healing and wisdom. The Old Kingdom saw divine kingship fully flower. Old Kingdom pharaohs were living forms of Horus. After death, they became Osiris. The king was the key link between people and gods. He kept cosmic order, called Mut. Mut was the harmony of the universe. More than truth, it was cosmic balance. Pharaohs said they lived by Mut. Their rituals, temple care and border defense kept chaos away. To do their divine job, Old Kingdom rulers built a bureaucracy. Special titles and offices appeared. The system went from viziers down to scribes and taxmen. Monuments list titles like overseer of all the king's works. A complex government ran across the Nile Valley. While Imhotep's pyramid was huge, what came next was bigger. How could an old culture build so perfectly? The answer is Dynasty 4 from 2613 to 2490 for BC. Pyramid building peaked under pharaohs Khufu, Afri and Menkaure. Their tombs at Giza are the peak of ancient engineering. Khufu's Great Pyramid was originally 481 feet tall. It had about 2.3 million stone blocks. Each block weighed 2.5 to 15 tons. The math is amazing. The base is almost a perfect square, sides differ by inches. Building needed many skilled workers, not slaves. Rotating teams of Egyptian laborers did the work. Farmers helped during the Nile flood when new farming happened. Workers' villages show they were fed well and got medical care. Teams had fun names like Friends of Khufu. Big projects needed huge coordination. Harbors were built to bring stone from far away. Copper tools were sharpened often against hard stone. Food output grew to feed workers. Special artists made interior rooms and passages. This was history's first big state project. Beyond size, pyramids work cosmic machines in Egyptian thought. Passages aligned to specific stars like Orion's belt linked to Osiris. The pyramid shape was the first land from creation. It also meant the sun's rays. These were not just tombs, but launch pads for the pharaoh to join the gods. Inside Khufu's pyramid, the king's chamber has strange features. A chef's point key stars in the sky. The sarcophagus was too big to bring in later. It was placed during building, showing advanced planning. Pyramid building had big social effects. It showed the pharaoh's godlike power to organize huge work. It also built national identity, uniting thousands in shared purpose. Skills from building astronomy to engineering influenced Egypt for ages. After dynasty for pyramids continued, but never as big or precise. 5th dynasty pharaohs built smaller pyramids and sun temple. By the 6th dynasty quality fell as royal power weakened. The Great Pyramid Age lasted only a few generations, but it showed ancient Egypt at its strongest. A society able to do what no one else could for thousands of years. While pyramids shrank, the idea of divine kingship grew. The pharaoh now was a living bridge between people and gods. This change was planned. The pharaoh stood atop a religious system. He guaranteed universal harmony. Each sunrise happened because the king did the right rituals. His ceremonies kept creation in order. The look of royal power got more complex. The pharaoh always wore full regalia. The crook for shepherding his people. The flail for his power to punish. The Neme's headdress framed his face. These were not just decorations but visual theology. They made the human king look divine. On temple walls a common scene appeared. The pharaoh hitting enemies. These smithing scenes were often made in peacetime. They were magic protection, a ritual act in stone. The pharaoh forever beat chaos to keep order. The enemy figures were chaos, not real people. Royal authority needed a bigger administration. The vizier became the most powerful non-royal job, often from elite families or the king's relatives. The vizier oversaw justice, taxes and government. Each morning he met the pharaoh to discuss affairs. In the king's absence, the vizier's power was nearly total. He was key to rule, but always under the king. Royal power grew through the temple system. Temples were not just worship places, but economic powers. They controlled farms, workshops, and workers. By the New Kingdom, peak temples held 1/3 of Egypt's farmland. Each gift from pharaoh to temple land, or cattle strength and royal authority. The religious base for royal power changed too. The sun cult of Ra got very important. Pharaohs added son of Ra to their title. This sun link was literal in Egyptian belief. The king was made by the sun god's essence. Each pharaoh was a living piece of divine power. But divine power could not stop what came next. A collapse so deep it shook Egyptian belief. What force could break a civilization where kings commanded the sun? The answer is a perfect storm of problems. Around 20 to 100 BC, climate records show a dry trend in northeast Africa. The Nile Egypt lifeline acted unpredictably. Years of low floods hurt farming. The central state could not fix this. These disasters hit royal legitimacy. If the king controlled cosmic forces, why were fields empty? As harvests failed year after year, government crumbled. Tax money fell, food prices rose, a fiscal crisis. The big bureaucracy that built pyramids could not be kept. Worse, the idea of divine kingships offered a huge blow. How could people trust a living God who could not give food? Archaeology at local cemeteries tells a story. No marches, once royal agents, acted like independent rulers. Their tomb texts did not praise the pharaoh, but their own deeds. One governor, I called himself great overlord of the Nome. He said, I gave bread to the hungry and clothing to the naked. Such words were impossible at the old kingdom peak. Only the pharaoh could credit Egypt's prosperity. Fast decentralization caused a political domino effect. As no marches got independent, they kept local resources from the capital. Memphis, once Egypt's heart, lost power over distant areas. Less money meant the pharaoh could not build big or pay temple staff. This hurt both real authority and divine right. Pepi, the last major 6th dynasty ruler, showed this decline. Sources say he ruled 94 years. This long reign may have caused instability. As he aged, power split among court groups. Distant provinces slipped from central control. By his reign's end, Egypt was many separate lands, not one kingdom. Weak central rule let local religious practices grow. Temples for local gods became important, challenging royal cults. Local elites gave resources to local temples, not royal monuments. This changed Egypt's religious scene for good. Cosmic power, once only through the pharaoh, now spread to many cults. Royal burial practices show the decline. Great pyramids gave way to smaller tombs with worse materials. Pepi II's pyramid is much smaller and poorer than earlier ones. After his death, even these smaller monuments were impossible. By 2160 BC, central power fell apart. The United Kingdom broke into competing areas. Memphis was no longer the only capital. Rival centers rose at Heliopolis in Middle Egypt and Thebes in the south. What followed was the first intermediate period, a time of regional fights, competing claims, and cultural change. While Memphis faded to cities prepared to fight for Egypt's future, between Heliopolis north and Thebes south were different visions for Egypt. During this split time, about 2160 to 2055 BC, Egypt saw something unexpected, a cultural rebirth amid political chaos. The fall of central power let local innovation happen. Local artists made new styles free from old royal rules. Tombs at places like Mo'aland Gebel Ain show new art. The northern kingdom at Heliopolis began with Hitai, about 2160 BC. His heirs controlled the delta and parts of Middle Egypt. They had Mediterranean trade links. These rulers said they were protectors against bandits, a real worry with food shortages. The southern kingdom at Thebes grew under local governors. They later declared independence as the 11th dynasty. These Theban rulers had gold mines in the eastern desert and trade to Nubia. Early Theban kings like I expanded north, challenging Heliopolis. Rulers now had to justify power by action, not divine right. Tomb texts from this time are very direct about a leader's real deeds. I gave bread to the hungry and clothes to the naked, boasted one governor. This shows a new social deal: protection, not divine birth, earned loyalty. Political split caused a writing boom. Egypt's first political commentary and social criticism appeared. The instruction for King Emeric by a Cleopolitan king gives practical advice. Be skilled in speech, that you may be strong. Speech is stronger than any weapon. These texts admit ruling in hard times. The admonitions of UWE shows a world turned upside down. The poor man is full of joy, the wealthy man is sorrowful. Some think this shows real social change, others a warning tale. Archaeology shows local elites did well with less central control. Tombs at as Benny Hisson have fancy art and goods, sometimes better than kings. Local governors built big rock-cut tombs with scenes of hunting and farming, displays of wealth impossible under strong pharaohs. The first intermediate period let social movement happen. Tomb stories tell of people rising from low starts to power by skill, not birth. Being split politically let talent rise, the old strict hierarchy did not. After about a century of division, the Ban King Mentuhotep I began reunification about 2055 BC. Through war and smart marriages he spread control north. His win was marked at his tomb complex at Deir el-Bahari. This mixed pyramid ideas with new architecture showing Egypt's changed world. From the first intermediate period ashes came not just old ways back but something new. History calls Mentuhotep I Egypt's second unifier, but this reunification rewrote the deal between ruler and ruled for the next 1,000 years. After military win, Mentuhotep I faced fixing a broken society. The reunited kingdom needed a new governing idea. Unlike old kingdom pharaohs from Memphis, Middle Kingdom rulers based power at Thebes. This was not just an address change. It meant a full reset of Egyptian culture, religion and rule. Thebes' rising brought big religious change. The local god Amun, once minor, rose to become Amun-Ra, the state god. Royal propaganda mixed the Ban god, with older traditions. This kept religious continuity while setting new authority. Mentuhotep I's coronation, name meant Lord of the Rudder, is role inking to Sun belief, but with the Ban roots. Middle Kingdom rulers changed the pharaoh-subject relationship. Royal text and writing from this time show a shift in kingship. The tale of the eloquent peasant shows a common farmer demanding justice. This new ideal of reachable kingship appears in texts. They advise rulers to speak truth, do truth. Divine order was not just forced from above, but done through fair rule. Architecture showed this political change. Mentuhotep I's to Deir el-Bahari is an architectural turn. Built into cliffs, it mixes pyramid parts with columned terraces. This new design had both upper and lower Egyptian elements showing reunification. It set a new architectural style for later monuments. The administration was fully reorganized. The Middle Kingdom brought new titles and offices. Focus was on local administration. The job overseer of sealed things was key for managing revived trade. Administrative papirs show careful records tracking farm output and expedition teams. Economic recovery needed aggressive expansion. Pharaohs sent armies south, building forts along the Nubian border at places like Buchen and Des Imna. These were not just defenses but trade route controls to sub-Saharan resources. The Middle Kingdom saw mining restart in Sinai turquoise mines. Expeditions went to exotic places like Punt, maybe modern Somalia. Ships came back with trees, ivory and strange animals. Military innovation came with expansion. Middle Kingdom armies used composite bows, better armor and the K-Hope's curved sword. Writing of the time has tactic texts on formations and battle plans. This shows a new professional military. Writing blossomed in this renaissance. The Middle Kingdom made some of ancient Egypt lasting works. Philosophy like the instructions of Amenemhat. Adventure like the shipwrecked sailor. Deep thought like a dialogue of a man with his BA about death. These texts show a society thinking about authority, death and meaning. Art changed dramatically. Middle Kingdom sculpture left Old Kingdom perfect ideals. It added natural touches like furrowed brows, lined faces and expressions showing inner states. Royal portraits sometimes showed aging pharaohs, realistically a big change from divine perfection. Those real royal portraits showing leadership's weight were not just art choices. They reflected the huge tasks of 12th dynasty pharaohs. As marsh became farm and forts lined far borders, Egypt reached high achievement. Pharaohs even got worship as gods while alive. The 12th dynasty from about 1991 to 1802 BC brought Egypt to new administrative and cultural heights. Founder Amenemhat a set governance patterns his heirs perfected over to century-stable rule. The throne passed smoothly from father to son, and, like earlier fragmentation, under Senus, Areta Egypt's second 12th dynasty ruler building boomed. This pharaoh built temples from the delta to Nubia. He expanded Karnak with big granite pillars, setting foundations for centuries. The Fayum region saw the dynasty's best engineering. This natural depression was mostly marsh, but pharaohs, especially Amenemhat I changed it. Canals, dikes, and irrigation systems were built. The center was Lake Moeris, a huge artificial reservoir catching floodwater for dry season. This water marvel expanded Egypt's farmland, feeding more people and funding state growth. In foreign policy Senus, or Etii, I was the dynasty's top military mind. His Nubian campaigns aimed to secure economic interests, gold mines and trade routes. His plan mixed military pressure and infrastructure. Massive forts were built at regular spots along the Nubian border. Forts like Uran, Otai and Des, Hafek had double walls, 10 meters thick ditches and barracks for hundreds. They were not just military, but administrative centers with workshops, granaries and offices. Cultural achievements were also great. Court artists made a style showing kingship's psychological weight. Statues of Senus, or Etii, with furrowed brows and down-turned mouth, show a ruler knowing his burden. This art shift suggests kingship was now serious responsibility, not just divine right. Legal changes transformed Egyptian society in this golden age. Standard legal steps developed. Papyrus show formal steps for land sales, inheritance disputes and crime cases. Judges became more specialized. Local courts used standard methods kingdom-wide. The 12th dynasty built a government balanced between central and local power. Local governors stayed powerful, but checked by royal overseers reporting to the vizier. This checks and balances let bureaucracy work while stopping independence that hurt earlier dynasties. For all success, the Middle Kingdom had hidden weaknesses. The very systems that lifted Egypt held flaws that would bring a chaotic era later Egyptians nearly erased from history. The 13th dynasty end began the fall. Unlike 12th dynasty's strong succession, his later kings ruled shorter times, some mere months. This fast turnover hurt administration. Each new pharaoh meant policy shifts, undermining the golden age bureaucracy. As central power weakened, Egypt's borders became more open. The delta, always vulnerable, saw Canaanite people slowly enter from the Levant. These newcomers were not armies, but immigrants seeking chances in Egypt's still rich north. They settled in trade centers like Ava blending into Egyptian society, but keeping homeland links. A final collapse came about 1650 BC when a group of these Asiatic settlers called Hyksos took Delta control. Under King Salat, as they declared Egypt's 15th dynasty controlling the richest farm region. Native Egyptian rulers became subordinates. The Hyksos takeover is interesting, not just that it happened, but how. Unlike later Assyrian or Persian invasions, the Hyksos change was more merger than war. Archaeology at Ava shows Levantine buildings and burials beside Egyptian elements. Seals show Hyksos kings with Egyptian royal titles and art, but for names and culture. The military change they brought transformed North African war forever. From the militarized zone between Mesopotamia and Egypt, they brought horse-drawn chariots. These fast platforms let archers hit and run before infantry responded, a new advantage for Egypt. Hyksos also brought better metalwork, making bronze weapons stronger than Egypt. Meanwhile, in Upper Egypt, especially Thebes, native dynasties stayed independent. Archaeology shows 17th dynasty rulers adopting Hyksos military ideas while building resistance story. Tombs from this time show duality Egyptian in many ways, but with weapons and war images. This period is hard to rebuild due to few official records. Administrative papi almost disappear versus Middle Kingdom careful record. Historians use private inscriptions, archaeology and later nationalistic accounts. Even the king list from this time is debated. The Hyksos time was not just for an apparition, as later propaganda claimed. Culture moved both ways. Hyksos rulers used Egyptian, administration worshipped Egyptian. Gods especially set link to their storm god and built Egyptian-style monuments. Religious texts from this time show new theological mixes influencing later traditions. After about a century of split rule tensions between Thebes and Ava, was turned to open war. The mummy of the Ban king Seqnn shows a violent death. His skull has many wounds from Hyksos-style axes, suggesting he died in battle. His son Kamose continued the fight. His victory stela shows nationalistic feeling. Why do I sit united with an Asiatic each holding his slice of Egypt? The new kingdom began not with a whimper, but a wind-changing Egypt's fate forever. After a century under Hyksos Ea, the Ban prince fought to take back Egypt. Following his father Seqnn and brother Kamose, who died fighting Hyksos Muzi won about 1550 BC. He reunited Egypt and started the 18th dynasty. This one changed Egypt's worldview. Memory of foreign rule left a mark, creating will to never be humiliated again. The once inward kingdom now pushed out to make buffer zones. Egypt was no longer content with isolation. It wanted to control labors. The military that allowed this had a revolution in tactics and organization. Egyptians learned from former Hyksos rulers adopting and improving their innovations. The chariot became war's centerpiece mobile archery platform. Military careers became paths to power. Successful generals got big lands and influence. The army became permanent, not just raised for campaigns. Thebes stayed the spiritual and administrative heart of this new Egypt. Its importance shown by big buildings celebrating the winning dynasty. But real power behind the throne grew with the eminent priesthood, who helped the Ban royal family against Hyksos. In thanks, Muzi and his heirs gave huge wealth and power to Ammon temples. This lifted Ammon, once a local god, to new height. Mixing Ammon with sun god Ram, a supreme god whose priests had big political and economic power. The economic engine for this imperial age used Nubian gold mines, tribute from conquered people, and reopened trade routes. Muzi not only rebuilt but expanded Egypt's infrastructure. He ordered new quarries and trade trips for luxury goods elites wanted. Stone, wood and exotic materials flowed into Egypt like never before, enabling a construction boom. Military when alone did not secure Egypt's new place. Diplomatic marriages, treaties and placing loyal administrators made a network binding foreign lands to Egypt. Children of foreign rulers were often brought to Egypt for education, a form of hostage taking, ensuring parent loyalty while teaching next leaders Egyptian culture. Court culture reflected Egypt's new cosmopolitan nature. Foreign influences in art, language and fashion became stylish and not rejected. The royal family used some international styles but kept Egyptian religion and royal art. This cultural peak came under Hatshepsut Thutmose, when Egyptian art and architecture reached new refinement. This practical use of foreign ideas soon brought huge rewards. At its peak, Egypt's empire stretched over 2,000 miles north to south. Conquered lands sent steady resources to the pharaoh's treasury. Ambitious 18th dynasty rulers turned defense into an imperial machine. Thutmose pushed Egypt's borders farther than any before into Syria, setting a frontier at the Euphrates River. He put a victory stela by the river, declaring Egypt's northeast border to the world. But his grandson Thutmose was Egypt's greatest military leader. Taking power after Hatshepsut's death, he fought 17 campaigns in 20 years. He took lands from Sudan to Syria. His biggest win was at Medigo against Canaanite princes. When generals advised a safe route around the city, Thutmose said, "I shall go on this road of Medigo, follow me." Leading through a narrow pass, he surprised the enemy, scattering them. The Medigo siege lasted 7 months, ending with many city-states submitting. The Egyptian military grew more sophisticated under these warrior pharaohs. Beyond chariots, they used special archer infantry and scout units. Amenhotep II Thutmose II's son boasted of his skill, saying he could shoot arrows through copper targets while driving a chariot full speed. True or not, such tales reinforced the pharaoh as unbeatable warrior king. The administration supporting imperial rule was remarkable. Egypt set garrison towns across conquered lands, each with military commanders, tax collectors and diplomats. Local rulers who submitted kept their lands but sent heirs to Egypt for education, a soft hostage system ensuring compliance. This indirect rule let Egypt control huge areas with few people. Records of these wins were carefully kept. On Karnak temple walls, Thutmose I wrote the annals details of his campaigns, with loot 20 for chariots, 2,241 horses, 2,500 for unnobles, and lots of gold and silver. These were not just boasts, but propaganda, showing the pharaoh's divine mandate through military might. Imperial success changed Egyptian society. Foreign goods became status symbols for elites. Minoan-style frescoes adorned palaces, Levantine jewelry appeared in noble tombs, exotic foods were on royal tables. Canaanite gods like Baal and Astarte entered Egyptian religion. Even Egyptian language borrowed words from subject peoples, especially military and trade terms. The empire made a new official class with international experience and language skills. Royal messengers moved between courts with diplomatic letters. Spies dressed as merchants gathered news on threats. The famous Amarna letters, diplomatic mail, and Akkadian cuneiform show a network between Egypt and other powers: Hittites, Itani, Assyrians, Babylonians. Among pharaohs who expanded Egypt's reach, one stands apart, not for war but breaking ancient gender barriers. When Thutmose I died unexpectedly about 1479 BC, no one predicted his widow would go from queen regent to Egypt's most successful female pharaoh. Iru's legacy was so threatening later kings tried to erase her from history. Hatshepsut began her reign normally as regent for young stepson Thutmose II, but in a few years she took an unprecedented step, declaring herself king of Upper and Lower Egypt. This was not just a title change. Hatshepsut rewrote kingship rules, commissioning statues showing her in traditional male gear, including the false beard, but keeping her female identity. Some images show a masculine body, others keep feminine features under royal symbols. The politics behind Hatshepsut's rise show her diplomatic genius. She did not remove Thutmose II entirely but kept him as co-ruler while taking primary royal authority. She won key support from high officials, especially Sen-enmuti, who rose from low start to become her chief architect and maybe close confidant. Her power base included the influential Amun priesthood, whose temples she expanded, ensuring divine backing for her unusual rule. Hatshepsut's reign focused on economic prosperity over military expansion. While male rulers measured greatness in battle wins, she rebuilt trade networks. Her top diplomatic success was the expedition to Punt, shown in detailed reliefs at her temple. These carvings show Egyptian ships full of myrrh trees, frankincense, gold, ivory, and exotic animals like baboons and leopards. The Punt trip was not just trade, but political theater, showing Egypt's reach and Hatshepsut's ability to get luxury goods without war. Architecturally, Hatshepsut changed Egypt's landscape. Her masterpiece, the mortuary temple at Deir el-Bahari, is one of ancient Egypt's most innovative designs. Built into cliffs opposite Thebes, its elegant terraces with columns mix architecture with natural landscape. The temple was many things: a monument to her reign, a place for her mortuary cult and strong propaganda, and a showing her legitimacy as pharaoh. To strengthen her throne claim, Hatshepsut used theology smartly. She ordered reliefs showing her divine conception. The god Amun took her father Thutmose I's form, visiting her mother, making Hatshepsut not just royal born, but divinely conceived. This origin story lifted her claim above human politics to cosmic certainty. She also stressed her role keeping cosmic order by restoring monuments, reopening trade, and holding religious festivals with great show. For about 22 years, Hatshepsut ruled a peaceful, prosperous Egypt. But after her death, her successor Thutmose II, ruling alone, began removing her from official history. Her and Amun's image work for monuments host statues broken her achievements given to male pharaohs. This Erasure attempt was not just personal revenge, but an effort to restore male-only kingship Hatshepsut challenged. Egyptian history has few true revolutionaries, but the pharaoh called Akhenaten took a radical path, creating such shock waves Egyptians later pretended it never happened. While earlier pharaohs like Hatshepsut challenged tradition, within systems Amenhotep IV broke Egypt's foundational religion entirely. Born about 1380 BC, Amenhotep IV first ruled normally, but in his 5th year he had a spiritual change. The traditional gods, Amun-Ra, Osiris, Isis and hundreds more, became secondary to one god, the Aten, shown as a sun disk with hands on rays. This was not just lifting one god above others, but cancelling worship of all others. To cement this religious revolution, Amenhotep IV changed his birth name to Akhenaten, meaning effective spirit of the Aten, a full break with tradition. More dramatically, he left the old capital Thebes with its big Amun temples and built a new city in the desert named Akhet and horizon of the Aten. This planned city, modern Amman, arose in a few years with open-air temples, so sun rays touched altars, palaces with no roofs and wide roads aligned with the sun's path. The revolution went beyond religion to art and culture. Egyptian art styles, unchanged for 1,000 years, were replaced by a look so distinct archaeologists know Amarna art immediately. Royal figures, especially Akhenaten, appeared with long skulls, feminine hips, thick lips and thin-limbed. More remarkably, the pharaoh was shown in family scenes, kissing children, dining with his wife, or relaxing, humanizing the god-king. Queen Nefertiti, whose name means the beautiful one has come, was not just a wife, but a co-ruler in scenes once only for kings. Her famous limestone bust, found in 1912, shows her beauty and political importance. In temple relief, she wears the pharaoh's crown and hits enemies' acts once only for male rulers. Some think after Akhenaten's death, Nefertiti ruled briefly as pharaoh under names Nefer-Nefer-Ua-10 or Esmen-Khkr. While religious revolution consumed Akhenaten, and Egypt's big empire began crumbling at the edges. Letters found that Amarna showed desperate pleas from vassal kings begging for Egyptian military help against enemies. Hittites grew influence in Syrial-Ocal rebellions, threatened Egyptian control in Canaan. Akhenaten's response was minimal. He seemed more concerned with perfecting religious rites than keeping international power. Within Egypt, changes were very unpopular. The Amun priesthood, once Egypt's richest, most powerful religious group, was shut down. Their temples closed, names cut for monuments, huge wealth moved to Aten worship. Ordinary Egyptians lost touch with familiar gods who guided daily life for millennia. While Akhenaten's name was being erased from history, his successor would become one of the most known in archaeology, but not for great life achievements. The puzzle of Tutankhamun is how his unremarkable reign made history's most remarkable find. After Akhenaten's religious revolution, Egypt had a child king, a boy about 9 years old. Tutankhamun inherited not just a throne, but a kingdom in spiritual crisis. The court officials who really held power, especially elder advisor and military commander Hormizd, saw urgent need to restore Egypt's traditional religion. These men had survived Akhenaten's revolution, watching Egypt international, while standing fallen, internal unity break. Now, with a pliable young ruler as figurehead, they quickly fixed damage. The key policy document of Tutankhamun's reign was the Restoration Stela, a text painting a dark picture of Egypt under Aten. The temples of the gods and goddesses were fallen into decay, their shrines ruined, become mounds overgrown with weeds. The stela was more than administrative reform, it was a theological correction. It justified return to orthodoxy by describing gods abandoning Egypt during Akhenaten's heresy. Behind this royal decree stood Tutankhamun's vizier and likely grandfather or great-uncle. I had survived the Amarna period by adapting to Akhenaten's religious needs while keeping traditional ties. Now with a child king under his care, I arranged Egypt's religious revival. Beside him, General Horm-Ib handled military affairs, rebuilding Egypt, neglected for unrelations and defenses. The young king became the perfect vessel for religious restoration. Buildings at Karnak Temple showed Takanig offering to Amon-Ra and other traditional gods. Skilled workers were recalled to fix damaged god statues. 2 Takanig's cart issues appear on restored monuments across Egypt, symbolically reclaiming them for Orthodox religion. Far from just religious acts, these were a desperate try to restore cosmic order to a kingdom thought fallen into chaos under Akhenaten. Despite these efforts, Tutankhamun's real control over state affairs stayed limited. His short life. DNA study of his mummy confirms he had several physical problems, including a club foot needing walking sticks. Dozens were in his tomb. Analysis also showed malaria infections, possibly weakening his already fragile health. These health issues, maybe from royal family marriage to relatives, limited his purse in an impact on rule. When Tutankhamun died unexpectedly, about age 18 or 19, he left no heir. His young widow and Amen was in a hard spot. Archaeology suggests she may have written desperate letters to the Hittite king, asking for a son as husband, a bold diplomatic gamble that failed. Instead, Elder took the throne, marrying Amen to make his claim seem right before Horm-Ib succeeded him. These military men would complete erasing the Amarna period from official history. If history went differently, Tutankhamun might be a forgotten transition figure. But in 1920, to Howard Carter's discovery of his nearly intact tomb in the Valley of the Kings turned this minor king into archaeology's biggest celebrity. The amazing burial goods, including the solid gold mask, now the very symbol of ancient Egypt, show the period's great art. The 5,398 catalogued items from his burial give our best view of New Kingdom royal burial practices. After Egypt's religious restoration under Tutankhamun, the empire needed more than a return to tradition. It needed a ruler whose legacy would be carved not just in stone but in civilization's memory. While many pharaohs claimed divine status, only one blurred the line between man and god so well that 3,000 years later we know him simply as the Great. Born into the 19th dynasty, about 1303 BC, Ramses I took the throne in his early 20s after his father Seti I's short rule. What followed was an unmatched 66-year reign, changing Egypt's landscape physically and culturally. By his death at remarkable age 90, Ramses had over 100 children, with many wives and concubines, making his own dynasty within a dynasty. The scale of Rameses's building plans is almost beyond understanding. While earlier pharaohs built impressive monuments, Ramses built on a scale near obsession. The temples at Abu Simbel are perhaps his most amazing work. Big structures cut into sandstone cliffs overlooking the Nile. The main temple entrance has 4 huge seated Ramesses statues, each 66 feet tall. Most cleverly, the temple was designed with perfect astronomy, so twice a year, on February 22nd and October 22nd, the rising sun shines through the whole temple, lighting statues of Ramesses and gods Amen, leaving only underworld god Toa in dark symbolically. Beyond Abu Simbel, Ramesses expanded or built over a dozen major temples, countless statues and whole cities. His mortuary temple, the Ramesseum, had a seated colossus over 1,000 tons, a feat challenging modern construction. At Karnak and Lux, the big columns and courtyards bore his name. His new capital, Ramesses in the Delta, became one of the ancient world's largest cities, called sparkling like the horizon of heaven. While remembered as builder, Ramesses set his military fame early. In his 5th year, he fought the Hittite Empire at Kadesh in modern Syria. Though nearly a disaster when separated from most of his army, Ramesses claimed a miracle win, fighting thousands alone until help came. Battle reality was likely a stalemate, but Ramesses' propaganda machine turned it into Egypt's greatest victory, shown on temple walls with growing detail. This campaign led to the world's first written peace treaty in 1258 BC, carved in hieroglyphs and Hittite cuneiform. The deal set borders, military alliance, and even extradition rules between the two superpowers. The treaty was so historically important, a copy now hangs at United Nations headquarters in New York as ancient diplomacy symbol. Rameses's favorite queen, the beautiful Nefertari, got unmatched honors in life and death. Her tomb in the Valley of the Queens has some of ancient Egypt's finest paintings, bright colors, still visible after 3 millennia. When she died, Rameses built a big temple at Abu Simbel just for her and goddess Hathor. Perhaps most telling of Rameses's character was his habit of taking existing monuments. Across Egypt, older statues and buildings were inscribed with his cartouches, sometimes replacing earlier kings' name. This was not just vanity, but a calculated program to ensure his immortality through being everywhere. He was rewriting history to put himself at Egypt's story center. The immortality Ramesses sought through stone worked well. We still know his name. But the empire he strengthened began falling apart almost after his death. Though Ramesses put himself at Egypt's story center, the chapters after showed how fast even the greatest legacies fade. Succession rubble began immediately. Ramesses' 13th son, Mennetal, was already in his 60s when he took power. Though he pushed back Libyan invasions and Sea People's attacks, recording these wins on the famous Israel Stela with the earliest written reference to Israel, his reign began Egypt's slow decline. The power gap worsened after his death, leading to succession fights and short reigns. The next dynasty, the 20th, tried to capture past glory, with many rulers taking the name Ramesses, hoping to borrow their great predecessor's power. This line of Ramesses imitators, from Ramesses I through Ramesses X, I, showed increasingly desperate tries to keep Egypt's former grandeur appearance, while real influence faded. This naming habit reveals much about ancient Egyptian. Fault names held power, and by taking history's most successful pharaohs, named these rulers hoped to borrow his strength. Among these successors, Ramesses I stands out as perhaps the New Kingdom's last truly effective pharaoh. When the mysterious Sea Peoples, a group of naval raiders from Mediterranean regions, swept the eastern Mediterranean, about 1175 BC, destroying the Hittite Empire and other civilizations, Ramesses I did what few could. He beat them. Battle scenes at his mortuary temple Medinet Habu show Egyptian archers firing into enemy ships while the pharaoh's navy trapped invaders. The text says, "Those who reached my frontier, their seed is not, their heart and soul are finished forever." But this victory was costly. The huge military spending drained Egypt's resources, and the civilization never fully got back its international place. Economic troubles followed, including history's first recorded labor strike, when royalty workers at Deir Medina stopped work after grain payment fell months behind. Ramesses I's end was as troubled as his reign. In the harem conspiracy, a group of royal wives, officials and priests plotted to kill the king and put a minor prince on the throne. Modern CT scans of Ramesses I's mummy show a fatal throat wound, likely from a knife, confirming what ancient court papers suggested. The conspiracy killed the pharaoh, though plotters were caught and executed. The pharaohs, after faced growing problems on all sides, tomb robbery became common, with thieves systematically looting the valley of the king's, crime unthinkable earlier. The tomb robbery papia detail investigations and trials of thieves who confessed under torture to robbing royal tombs for treasure. Even Ramesses I's tomb was not spared. Investigators found all the royal children's places he broken into. Power increasingly went to local authorities as central control weakened. The high priests of Ammon at Karnak acted almost as independent rulers, controlling big temple estates and later taking royal symbols. The most prominent heir, Iho, put his name in royal cartouches, effectively declaring himself southern Egypt's king, while last Ramessid kings kept nominal control from Pi Ramesses in the north. By Ramesses Xi's reign end about 1016 BC, Egypt had fundamentally changed. The united new kingdom, once respected across the known world, had split. Foreign influences entered deeper into Egyptian society, and the country entered the third intermediate period, the time when Libyan military commanders would start their own dynasties, and Nubian kings would conquer Egypt from the south, turning former subjects into overlords. The mighty empire, once from Syria to Sudan, now looked like a patchwork of competing powers, where priests could have more authority than pharaohs and foreign generals claimed divine Egyptian kingship. This was not just political split, but the complete flip of everything that made Egypt Egypt for over 1,000 years. About 1016 BC, as the last new kingdom, Pharaoh lost control, Egypt entered deep change. The nation split into working regions with competing power centers. In the north, a new capital rose at Tanis, in the Nile Delta, where 21st dynasty pharaohs kept royal show but controlled only part of Egypt's sold land. Meanwhile, in Thebes, the high priests of Ammon made what was nearly a religious state, with their own military ruling the south, almost fully independent. This unusual power share was a big reversal in Egyptian rule. The high priests controlled Ammon's big temple lands and treasury, giving them economic power, rivaling or beating northern pharaohs. These priest-kings used their own dating, did independent foreign policy, and even took royal titles while keeping loyalty show to distant Onite kings. What made this time special was how power was thought of. Traditional royal authority always came from divine kingship and central control. Now, Egypt worked more like allied states than one kingdom. The idea of dual authority, religious and secular, was a basic break with Egypt's past political fault. Archaeology shows despite political split, Egyptian culture stayed lively, adapting to new realities, not disappearing. The royal cemetery at Tanis gave amazing finds like pharaohs, Upsen-Nes eyes to a 21st dynasty ruler. Unlike the familiar gold of Tutankhamun's burial, Upsen-Nes was buried in a fine silver coif and metal more precious than gold in ancient Egypt due to rarity. When Pierre Monti found this tomb in 1939, the world barely noticed, busy with World War II start. The deepest change came when Libyan military commanders, descendants of mercenaries who settled in Egypt generations earlier, took power, starting the 22nd dynasty about 945 BC. Shoshenq, the dynasty founder, managed to reunify Egypt briefly under his command. His military campaigns went beyond Egypt's borders, including invading Judah. Israel recorded not just in Egyptian text, but the Hebrew Bible, as Jerusalem's sacking by Shishake, king of Egypt. These Libyan pharaohs kept Egyptian cultural traditions while adding new practices. They shared power by putting family in key military and religious jobs, making a network of loyal followers, not using traditional bureaucracy. This practical rule approach allowed local freedom while keeping central control. By the 8th century BC, this system began to fail. The 22nd dynasty split, with rival Libyan families making the competing 23rd dynasty. At times, Egypt had many pharaohs ruling together in different regions, each claiming right. Political marriages made temporary alliances, while betrayals and power shifts became common. Royal succession had no clear pattern. Brothers, sons, even generals outside the royal family took the throne. Through this political trouble, everyday Egyptian life went on. Local economies focused on regional trade, not the big international commerce of the new kingdom. Art traditions changed with different regional styles in sculpture, architecture, and burial practices. Religion stayed constant, temple rituals continuing despite changing political scene. As temple rituals continued, during Egypt's political chaos, a strong force grew far south. Beyond the first cataract, beyond even the second, the old kingdom of Kush prepared to rewrite Egyptian history in the most unexpected way. About 745 BC, while Egypt's regional powers fought among themselves, Kushite warriors crossed the border not as simple invaders, but as self-declared saviors of a civilization they deeply admired. The Kushite rulers of the 25th dynasty saw their move not as foreign conquest but divine mission. King Pi, also called Pi, the dynasty founder, marched north with an army full of religious purpose. His famous victory Stela found at Napad shows his motives went beyond land gain. Facing Egyptian nobles, he expressed horror at their ritual impurity. They entered his presence without proper cleaning and worse, had neglected sacred temples under their care. "How can you stand in the house of Horus with unclean bodies?" Pi reportedly asked Egyptian princes, surrendering to him. Unlike earlier conquerors who looted Egypt's treasures, Pi insisted on ritual purity through his campaign. Before entering Memphis, he cleaned himself with water from the sacred lake and gave offerings to gods, showing his commitment to Egyptian religious tradition. The Kushite kings had absorbed Egyptian culture for centuries. Their administration used hieroglyphic writing. They built pyramids, though smaller and steeper than Egypt's classic ones, and they worshipped Egyptian gods. Their royal cemeteries at El-Kay, ruined Nuri, showed deep commitment to Egyptian burial practices changed with distinct Nubian elements. When they conquered Egypt, they did not need to learn its culture, they already practiced it. Pi's son Abaka strengthened Kushite control, moving the administrative center to Thebes. He showed his commitment to Egyptian traditions by collecting and saving old religious texts. The famous Shabaka stone had what he said was a copy of a worm-eaten old papyrus keeping creation myths from earliest dynasties. Memphis priest, the most famous Kushite pharaoh Taha-Kue, ruled during Egypt's brief return as a regional power. His reign saw ambitious building across Egypt and Nubia. At Karnak, he built a great colonnade with big columns topped with papyrus capitals. At Kawa in Nubia, he built temples matching Egypt's. Taha-Kue's monuments had distinct Kushite elements, royal figures with muscular bodies, broad shoulders, and strong faces different from traditional Egyptian royal portraits. The Kushite pharaohs revived Egyptian architecture on a scale not seen since Ramses II. Archaeology shows they fixed neglected temples, rebuilt damaged monuments, and restarted art workshops. Their building program was not just artistic, but political statement about their legitimacy and role as keepers of Egyptian tradition. This Nubian dynasty's rule was challenged by the rising Assyrian Empire under Kings Esa, Hadden, and Ashurbanipal. Assyrian records describe campaigns against Kush and Egypt as one place. In 671 BC, Hadden's forces took Memphis and pushed Taha-Kue south. Though Kushites briefly retook Lower Egypt, later Assyrian campaigns finally forced them back to their Nubian homeland. The 25th dynasty's importance goes beyond their short Egypt control. Their respect for Egypt's traditions helped save religious texts and art practices otherwise lost. Their rule is unique in world history. Conquered people ruled by those who saw themselves as true keepers of the conquered culture. The Kushite keeping of Egyptian culture would face its biggest test not from within, but from a ruthless military machine whose reputation spread fear across the ancient world. The Assyrian Empire, with its iron weapons, advanced siege engines, and brutal war tactics, had been expanding west through the Near East with terrible efficiency. By mid-7th century BC, their sight turned to Egypt's wealth, setting a clash between ancient tradition and military innovation. Assyrian King Esa Hadden's 671 BC campaign began a new era in Egyptian history. Unlike earlier invaders wanting to adopt Egyptian culture, Assyrians came with overwhelming force and cold practicality. Their army moved precisely through the Delta, using tactics Egyptian forces never met. Assyrians were era masters. They often impaled captives, skinned enemies alive, and made pyramids of cut heads to break resistance before battle. When Taha-Kue retreated south after Memphis's fall, Assyrians used a planned strategy to keep control. They split northern Egypt into small administrative units, each run by local rulers willing to swear loyalty to Assyria. This split strategy stopped united resistance while letting Assyrians take maximum wealth through tribute and taxes. The Syrian hold on Egypt proved hard to keep from far away. When Esarhaddon died in 616 BC, Taha-Kue seized chance to retake Memphis. This brought a big response from new Assyrian king Ashurbanipal, who sent an army again pushing Toharqa south. Ashurbanipal's writings say his forces trampled Egypt underfoot like a bull stands upon grass, showing both conquest violence and Assyrian intimidating propaganda skill. The final humiliation came in 663 BC, when Ashurbanipal's forces chased Toharqa's successor, Antimony, all the way to Thebes, the sacred city standing millennia as Egypt's religious hearts suffered a terrible sack. An Assyrian account gives their view that city all of it I conquered with Ashurbanishta's help, silver, gold, precious stones, all the palace wealth I took from it and counted as spoil. This went deeper into Egypt than any previous for an army. Thebes' looting did not just take wealth, it hit the very base of Egyptian spiritual identity. The Kushite dynasty's power in Egypt effectively ended, with this defeat forcing them back permanently to Nubia. After Ashurbanipal made Necho a ruler at Sais, the first loyal Assyrian subject, Necho would later use Assyria's growing troubles elsewhere to reassert Egyptian independence. His diplomatic marriages, strategic alliances with mercenaries, especially Greek soldiers, and patient political move let him gradually reunify Egypt, starting the 26th dynasty, the last major native Egyptian royal house. The Assyrian period left lasting marks on Egyptian society. Their bureaucratic practices influenced Egyptian administration system. Scribes began using Mesopotamian record-keeping parts. Egyptian art from this time shows subtle Assyrian influences in royal images and battle scenes. The military was permanently changed, adding foreign mercenaries, especially Greeks and Carians, who stayed in Egyptian armies. Archaeology from Thebes tells a more complex story than Assyrian accounts suggest. Though damaged, many temples kept working on rebuilding started relatively quickly. Egyptian institutions' toughness allowed cultural continuity even after such a traumatic event. But the mental impact stayed deep. Egyptians could no longer believe their land was divinely protected from foreign conquest. From foreign domination ashes came an Egypt determined to reclaim identity through a fascinating contradiction, embracing innovation while obsessively recreating its ancient past. Thebes' ruins would give way to something unexpected, a cultural rebirth borrowing equally from Egypt's golden age and the new international world order. Necho, once an Assyrian puppet, turned himself into Egypt's savior. After securing Delta control about 660 for BC, he gradually expanded south, finally reunifying the split nation. His master move came through diplomacy, not conquest. He sent his daughter Nitocris to Thebes, where the powerful god's wife of Ammon adopted her, effectively merging the northern royal line with southern religious authority. 26th dynasty rulers engineered what historians call the Sate Renaissance, named for their capital at Sais. This was not just political restoration, but deliberate cultural revival. Palace artists studied thousand-year-old reliefs, copying their styles remarkably closely. Scribes carefully recovered ancient texts and religious formulas. New temple architecture copied old kingdom proportions and layouts, making a timeless continuity feel even as Egypt's world changed. This cultural nostalgia was not just artistic, but strategic. By placing themselves as the true heirs to Egypt's golden age, the Sate pharaohs strengthened their claim to rule a nation hurt by centuries of foreign rule. They made what scholars call a resurrection environment, where temples became time capsules keeping ancient traditions against an uncertain future. Yet this was also Egypt's most internationally connected time. Greek mercenaries and traders set up permanent settlements, especially at Nokrat, is in the western delta, given special status by Pharaoh Amasasai about 570 BC. This first official Greek colony became a busy trade hub where Mediterranean merchants swapped olive oil and wine for Egyptian grain and papers. Archaeology has found thousands of Greek pottery pieces with Egyptian artifacts, showing lively cultural exchange. The 26th dynasty's military relied heavily on these foreign soldiers, especially the fearsome bronze men as Egyptians called Greeks. They got land, started families, and slowly blended into Egyptian society. Some even adopted Egyptian religious practices, dedicating statues and stelae in a fascinating mixed art style combining Greek proportions with Egyptian symbols. Despite this renaissance, Egypt's geopolitical place stayed risky. When the Neo-Babylonian Empire under Nabukshadnezzar's Beta Syrians, Egypt briefly expanded influence into the Levant. Pharaoh Necho I even started ambitious projects, including trying to connect the Nile to the Red Sea with a canal system, a remarkable engineering feat only finished centuries later. The Persian Empire's rise under Cyrus the Great dramatically changed power balance. Pharaoh Ramses I navigated these dangerous waters with great diplomatic skill, making alliances with Greek city-states and Lydian King Croesus to counter Persian expansion. His foreign policy kept Egypt prosperous and independent for decades, but the inevitable clash just waited for his heir. In 525 BC, Persian king Cambyses I invaded Egypt, beating Pharaoh Pius and Tik at the Battle of Pi-Lusum. Egyptian sources claim Cambyses used psychological warfare, putting cats sacred to Egyptians before his army, knowing Egyptian soldiers would hesitate to shoot arrows, fearing harm to revered animals. While likely exaggerated, this story shows the cultural clash between Egyptian religious feelings and foreign practicality. The Persian conquest started the 27th dynasty, the first fully for unruling house. Though Egyptian administration largely continued under Persian oversight, the symbolic wound was deep. Native resistance flared up periodically, with the 28th through 30th dynasties showing brief independence between Persian reconquest. Each return lasted shorter than the last. The final native pharaoh Netanebo fled to Nubia in 343 BC as Persian forces retook Egypt for the last time. The empire collision unfolded dramatically on Egyptian soil in 525 BC when Cambyses led the Achaemenid Persian forces against Pius and Tik at the Battle of Pi-Lusum. The battle itself became legendary not just for result, but Cambyses' clever psychological war. Knowing Egyptians saw cats as sacred, Persian soldiers reportedly carried cats into battle or painted their images on shields. Egyptian archers, reluctant to risk harming these divine creatures, held fire, giving Persians a key advantage, helping their win. After conquering Egypt, Cambyses did not just impose Persian ways. Instead, he took traditional Egyptian royal titles and image, making himself a proper pharaoh, while also being Persian ruler. This practical approach made the 27th dynasty a foreign power ruling through frames. Persians understood controlling Egypt needed more than military might. It needed cultural legitimacy, speaking to local people. Administrative change under Persian rule was thorough. Egypt became a satrap, part of the larger Achaemenid Empire provincial system. Persians set up a complex bureaucracy, with both Persian officials and Egyptian administrators working together. While Persian authority stayed total daily governance, often used Egyptian expertise, making a complex power share, keeping stability while taking wealth. Persian kings showed great political sense in religious policies. Though personally orchestration, they joined Egyptian religious ceremonies, gave donations to temples, and ordered art showing themselves doing traditional rituals for Egyptian gods. King Darius even ordered Egyptian laws written down, placing himself as Egyptian tradition's protector, while ensuring Persian dominance stayed unchallenged. But under accommodation, surface Persian rule brought unmatched taxation and res, or staking. Egyptians faced heavy financial loads as Persian authorities demanded regular tribute in gold, grain, and other goods. This use plus the mental weight of foreign rule sparked many rebellions through the First Persian period. The revolt, led by an Uruz-I in the 462nd BC, was especially important, briefly retaking parts of Egypt before Persian forces crushed it. The Egyptian independence dream finally happened in 404 BC, when using Persian Empire internal struggles native leaders started the 28th through 30th dynasties. This brief native rule return lasted 60 years with pharaohs, like Nectanebo, investing heavily in temple building and cultural revival. They tried to erase Persian rule memory, while strengthening Egypt's defenses against inevitable foreign power return. The Second Persian Conquest in 343 BC under Artaxerxes I showed the empire's falling patience with Egyptian resistance. Unlike earlier Persian rules, more accommodating approach this occupation brought harsh suppression. Persian forces systematically looted temples, set crushing financial penalties, took down defensive walls and killed resistance leaders. The Egyptian priesthood, once welcomed by Persian rulers, now faced direct attacks, and their authority and resources deepening Egyptian anger. Persian authority failed just 8 years later when Alexander the Great's Macedonian army swept through the Persian Empire. Reaching Egypt in 332 BC, Alexander met little resistance. Instead, many Egyptians welcomed him as liberator from Persian oppression. The priests at Siwa Oasis oracle declared Alexander a son of Ammon, giving him divine legitimacy even Persians never fully got. This religious approval turned Alexander from conqueror to divinely approved ruler in Egyptian eyes. Alexander's divine approval from Egyptian priests was just the start of his Egypt transformation. What happens when a military genius who conquered half the known world decides to build a city with his name on Egyptian soil, a city meant to betall others in the ancient Mediterranean? Alexander's vision for Egypt went far beyond conquest. In 331 BC, after his divine crowning at Memphis as pharaoh, he made a huge decision shaping the Mediterranean world for millennia. He ordered Alexandria's founding on a strategic strip between Lake Merotis and the Mediterranean Sea, a spot picked for its natural harbor and defense benefits. The legendary architect Dino Crates of Rhodes designed the city following a Hellenistic grid pattern with wide streets and separate quarters for different ethnic groups. Alexandria quickly became Alexander's Egypt crown jewel, a visible sign of his cultural mixing policy. The city had distinct Greek, Egyptian, and Jewish quarters, making one of history's first truly multicultural big cities. This was not just practical arrangement, but reflected Alexander's broader philosophy, uniting Eastern and Western traditions, what historians now call his Homo Concord or unity policy. While embracing his traditional pharaoh role, Alexander also started administrative reforms, blending Macedonian efficiency with Egyptian bureaucratic tradition. He appointed Greek Clemens of Nicaea as financial manager, while keeping Egyptian officials in local posts, a smart balance, preventing cultural friction that hurt Persian rule. Alexander knew effective governance needed both cultural sensitivity and practical organization. Unlike earlier conquerors, Alexander showed great religious tolerance. He joined Egyptian ceremonies at Memphis and gave offerings at temples across Egypt. His political genius showed an ability to seem authentically Egyptian to Egyptians while staying Macedonian to his armies. Shown in Egyptian context, he took traditional royal symbols addressing his troops. He kept his Macedonian identity. This cultural code switching worked remarkably well to strengthen his authority among different peoples. After starting Alexandria and setting Egypt as administration, Alexander left in spring 331 BC to continue his campaign against Persia. He would never return to Egypt. Over the next 8 years, his conquests stretched to India's borders, making one of history's largest empires. When fever took his life in Babylon in June 323 BC, his empire faced immediate succession crisis. His generals, the Deir Duke I or successors, began fighting for different regions' control. The Egypt battle was especially important. Ptolemy, one of Alexander's most trusted generals and childhood friend, outmaneuvered rivals through a bold act. He hijacked Alexander's funeral procession, heading to Macedonia, and brought the conqueror's embalmed body to Egypt. By controlling Alexander's remains, Ptolemy made his Egypt claim seem right and declared himself governor. By 305 BC, He had proclaimed himself King Ptolemy, Isotta, starting the Ptolemaic dynasty, ruling nearly 3 centuries. Under Ptolemy I's Alexandria flourished as the Hellenistic world's intellectual and trade center. The city's top achievements included the Lighthouse of Pharaohs, one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world, and the Great Library of Alexandria, holding hundreds of thousands of scrolls trying to collect all world knowledge. The Ptolemies also started the Mouse, Ion history's first research institute, attracting scholars like Euclid, Archimedes, and Eratosthenes. Alexandria's great monuments tell only half the Ptolemaic Egypt story. Under cultural achievement surface lay a royal family whose bloodline grew more tangled each generation. Greek monarchs adopting Egyptian customs in public while plotting against each other in private, making palace intrigues, even modern soap operas, seem mild by comparison. When Ptolemy I formally crowned himself pharaoh in 305 BC, he started more than another dynasty. He made a hybrid cultural system, dominating the Mediterranean for centuries. The Ptolemies were master cultural chamberlains, presenting themselves as proper pharaohs to Egyptian subjects while keeping Greek identity among fellow Hellenists. They funded huge temple complexes across Egypt, including the spectacular Temple of Horus at Edfu, the Temple of Hathor at Dend. A rare traditional Egyptian religious symbols flourished besides subtle Greek influences in architectural details. The dynasty's most shocking practice was their adoption of sibling marriage, previously unthinkable in Greek culture, but known in ancient Egyptian royal tradition. Starting with Ptolemy I marrying his full sister Arsinoe, this practice continued generations, supposedly to keep royal blood pure. Far from strengthening the dynasty, these unions produced increasingly unstable rulers. Later Ptolemies suffered genetic disorders and quick tempers, worsening the palace plots and family violence that became their hallmark. Court life in Ptolemaic Alexandria worked with breathtaking brutality. Mothers plotted against sons, brothers killed brothers, and wives removed husbands with cold precision. Ptolemy IV had his mother Berenice I murdered. Later Ptolemy I celebrated his power return by cutting up his nephew and sending the pieces to his sister wife Cleopatra as a birthday gift. These were not exceptions but typical of the dynasty's bloody internal politics. Despite this dysfunction, the Ptolemies turned Alexandria into an intellectual power unmatched in the ancient world. They expanded the Great Library's collection through aggressive acquisition tactics. Ships entering Alexandria's harbor had to give any books for copying, only copies returned to owners. The library attracted mathematicians like Eratosthenes, who accurately calculated Earth's circumference, and Euclid, whose elements became geometry's base for 2 millennia. Poets like Callimachus and Theocritus flourished under Ptolemaic support, making new literary forms influencing Roman authors generations. The dynasty's stability began crumbling as Rome's shadow lengthened across the Mediterranean. The turning point came in 168 BC, when Roman diplomat Gaius Popilius Laen famously drew a circle and around Ptolemy demanding he withdraw from Cyprus before stepping out. This humiliating surrender marked Egypt's falling sovereignty. The Rosetta Stone made during Ptolemy V's reign gives ironic proof of the dynasty's fading power. While celebrating the pharaoh's supposed achievements, the 3-language text actually records concessions to rebel priests and tax breaks given to stop and rest. This stone, later vital for deciphering hieroglyphs, shows how much the Ptolemies struggled to control their increasingly split kingdom. By the dynasty's final century, Roman involvement became common in Egyptian affairs. In 58 BC, Ptolemy I traveled to Rome to get loans from Crassus and Pompey, mortgaging Egypt's finances to keep his throne. His daughter, the famous Cleopatra I would later risk everything on alliances with Julius Caesar and Mark Antony in desperate tries to save Egypt's independence from Rome. Through their rule, the Ptolemies kept elaborate religious shows, including the cult of Serapis, a mixed god meant to appeal to both Greeks and Egyptians, and the Grand Ptolemy festival processions matching Olympic Games splendor. These cultural innovations helped keep social unity in a kingdom strained by ethnic tensions, economic pressures, and growing foreign interference. As elaborate Ptolemaic shows proved not enough against Rome's growing shadow, history would call a different ruler type to navigate Egypt's final chapter. Unlike her ancestors using spectacle and intimidation, Cleopatra V, I used something far more powerful, an amazing mix of intellectual brilliance and political cunning, nearly saving Egypt from Roman rule. Born in 16 BC into a dynasty full of betrayal and violence, Cleopatra got an education far beyond her predecessors. She mastered Greek philosophy, speaking, and math, while studying at Alexandria's intellectual centers. What truly set her apart, however, was her language talent. She spoke 9 languages fluently. This remarkable ability let her talk directly to foreign diplomats without translators, and most importantly, to speak to native Egyptians in their own tongue, something no previous Ptolemy did in nearly 3 centuries of rule. Cleopatra's path to power was neither simple nor sure. After her father Ptolemy Xii's death in 51 BC, she was forced to co-rule with her younger brother Ptolemy Xii. Their relationship worsened fast, ending in civil war when Cleopatra was driven from Alexandria. Her power return came through a legendary meeting with Julius Caesar, who arrived in Egypt chasing his rival Pompey. Rather than just asking for Roman help, Cleopatra boldly smuggled herself into Caesar's rooms, wrapped in a carpet, showing the theatrical flair and political daring becoming her mark. Caesar restored Cleopatra to her throne and fathered her sons Isurion, giving her a strong Rome connection. But this was far more than romance, it was a calculated political alliance. Cleopatra needed Roman military support to secure her rule, while Caesar got access to Egypt's huge grain supplies and wealth. When Caesar was killed in 40 BC, Cleopatra quickly allied with Mark Antony, one of Rome's most powerful generals and a second triumvirate member ruling Rome. Their relationship grew into both political and personal partnership. In 41 BC, Cleopatra hosted Antony in Alexandria, amazing him with extravagant banquets showing Egypt's wealth. She bore him 3 children and got enormous land gifts in return, including Cyprus, parts of Cilicia, Phoenicia, and Syria regions. These concessions strengthened Egypt's position, but alarmed Rome, especially Octavian, Antony's rival and Caesar's adopted son. Octavian launched a brilliant propaganda campaign against the couple, painting Antony as a man bewitched by a foreign queen, leaving Roman values. This image, the seductive Eastern temptress corrupting the noble Roman, would last millennia in Western Cleopatra accounts, hiding her true political skill. Archaeology tells a different story. Coins with her image show a strong-featured woman with a prominent nose and determined look, not the idealized beauty later Roman art and modern films show. The propaganda strategy worked. Roman opinion turned against Antony, and in 32 BC Octavian convinced the Senate to declare war not against a fellow Roman, but against Cleopatra. The decisive fight came at Actium in 31 BC, where Octavian's naval forces, under Agrippa, beat the combined fleet of Antony and Cleopatra. Though they escaped battle, their military position was hopeless. Back in Alexandria, with Octavian's forces nearing the city, in 30 BC Antony fell on his sword after false news of Cleopatra's death. Cleopatra, knowing she would be paraded through Rome as a captive in Octavian's triumph, chose suicide. According to Roman accounts, she arranged poisonous asps smuggled to her in a fig basket. Modern scholars debate whether snake venom or another poison was used, but result was the same. The last pharaoh of Egypt was dead, aged 39. The asp allegedly taking Cleopatra's life brought more than a queen's death. It marked the final collapse of Egypt's 3,000-year civilization as an independent power. When Augustus returned to Rome in 29 BC, he brought not just Egypt to vast wealth, but its very identity under imperial control. Unlike other conquered lands falling under Senate supervision, Augustus claimed this prize for himself, setting a precedent continuing centuries. Egypt became the emperor's personal property, too valuable to give anyone else. The new Roman province of Egypt needed special permission for senators, even to visit, with Augustus appointing a prefect from the equestrian order to govern in his name. This prefect held powers normally for the emperor himself, showing Egypt's unique status. The first prefect, Cornelius Gallus, put a garrison in Alexandria and methodically removed Ptolemaic resistance, bits establishing Roman dominance, while also recording his achievements in hieroglyphic inscriptions, taking the very symbols of the civilization he helped defeat. Egypt's amazing farm fertility made it indispensable to Rome. The province gave 1/3 of all grain eaten in the imperial capital, with special ships moving over 150,000 tons yearly up the Tiber. This economic lifeline was so crucial Augustus set a military unit just to guard grain shipment. When Emperor Vespasian took power in 16 AD, he secured Egypt control first, knowing whoever controlled its grain could starve Rome into surrender. Roman engineering changed the landscape, with new canals, irrigation systems, and farm technologies maximizing production. The Fayum region, already productive under Ptolemies, expanded greatly as Roman water skill turned marginal land into green field. This intensification came at a cost. Egyptian farmers bore crushing tax burdens, some villages leaving homes rather than face Roman tax collectors. Perhaps most striking was how Roman emperors embraced pharaonic imagery while taking apart Egyptian independence. Temple walls at Den, Dure Esna and Philae show Roman emperors doing traditional offering rituals, their names in royal cartouches. At Kom Umbo, Emperor Tiberius appears in the classic pharaonic pose, 1 foot forward, arms stiff, wearing the double crown, a scene indistinguishable from those carved 1,000 years earlier. The temple at Dende, you are now in New York's Metropolitan Museum, has hieroglyphs praising Augustus, a son of royal order of the two lands. Alexandria stayed the Mediterranean's intellectual centerpiece, where cultures collided and changed each other. Greek philosophers debated beside Jewish theologians like Philo, while Egyptian priests kept ancient traditions, even as their script became more limited to temple use. The city's famous library kept attracting scholars, though it never fully recovered from damage during Caesar's Alexandrian War. Roman officials, Greek merchants, and Egyptian craftsmen made a cosmopolitan society, unlike anywhere else in the ancient world. The traditional religious landscape slowly shifted as Greek and Latin replaced Egyptian in official context, while temple building continued under early Roman rule, especially under Caligula and Nero. Christianity's growth slowly wore away ancient practices. By late 4th century AD, when Emperor Theodosius banned pagan worship, many temples had already fallen from use. The Temple of Isis at Philae stood as the last working Egyptian temple until 537 AD, when Justinian finally ordered it closed. While Rome brought administrative efficiency through standard weight measures and money, they also brought systematic youth. The province was split into about 40 administrative districts, each carefully recorded through census and tax records. Romans saw Egypt mainly as a resource to be taken, with little interest in cultural preservation, beyond what served imperial propaganda. Egypt's story is one of toughness. For 3,000 years, it adapted, taking in invaders, mastering new tools, and mixing cultures while staying uniquely Egyptian. Its secret: adapting without losing identity.